Jeremy Carter was 16 when his stepmother, Diane, found the 20-inch blade under his bed, handmade, razor-sharp, and stained with something that looked too dark to be rust. By the time she realized what he was capable of, it was already too late to pretend she hadn't seen the signs. Diane Carter had never considered herself a paranoid woman. A retired nurse with a calm demeanor and a tidy home, she believed in order, reason, and second chances. When she married Martin Carter and became a stepmother to his teenage son Jeremy, she knew it wouldn't be easy. The boy had always been quiet, distant, and withdrawn. After Martin died in a sudden car crash 2 years later, Jeremy barely spoke a word. Grief, Diane assumed. A slow internal collapse. She gave him space. She gave him time. Jeremy was 16 now, tall and thin, with dark eyes that never seemed to rest. He spent most of his time in the basement, where he had a small workstation set up with tools, wires, and old mechanical parts. Diane thought it was harmless, maybe even therapeutic. He liked to take apart broken electronics and rebuild them into strange hybrid machines, half radio, half fan. It was unusual, but it wasn't dangerous. Not yet. One rainy afternoon, while doing laundry, Diane knocked on his door but got no answer. She entered anyway, arms full of clothes, and stopped cold. Something was lying on the floor, half tucked beneath the bed. It caught the light just right, a gleam of steel. She bent down and pulled it out. It was a blade, a massive one. 20 inches long from tip to handle, it looked like something out of a survivalist's nightmare. The blade was carved from what looked like old car metal, scavenged, reshaped, and sharpened to a deadly point. The edges were uneven but dangerously jagged. The grip was wrapped in tightly wound black paracord, giving it a rugged, tactical appearance. It wasn't decorative. It was made to be used. Her first thought was disbelief. Maybe it was a prop for a school project or some misguided attempt at edgy art. But Diane had been a nurse for over 30 years. She had seen real wounds. This thing could do serious damage. It wasn't a toy. It wasn't fake. She carefully laid the blade on the bed and looked around. Jeremy's room had always been dark and cluttered, but this time, it felt different. There were notebooks stacked in a neat pile by his desk. Most were filled with what seemed like schematics, drawings of knives, swords, and traps. There were also pages that chilled her. They showed figures bound in rope with red ink slashes across them. The blade appeared in nearly every sketch, sometimes in the person's hand, sometimes in their back. She put everything back exactly as it was, careful not to disturb the arrangement. That night Jeremy ate dinner like usual, staring at his plate, not speaking. He barely blinked when Diane asked how school was. He gave a vague shrug and said he was tired. Then he disappeared into the basement again, not emerging until the next morning. Diane didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, running through every possible explanation that would make this okay. But none came. The blade haunted her thoughts, not just because of what it was, but because someone had made it, carefully, patiently, with purpose. She had no idea what to do, but she knew one thing for sure. Something was very wrong with her stepson. The first missing pet was a gray tabby cat named Muffin. Her picture had been taped to the community bulletin board near the grocery store, next to a notice about free piano lessons. Diane saw it one afternoon and didn't think much of it. Cats wandered. They came back. But then the flyers kept coming. A golden retriever named Max, a lop-eared rabbit called Daisy, a Siamese, a beagle, a black cat. Each one vanished without a trace, and each flyer brought with it a growing sense of unease in the neighborhood. People started locking their gates. Children weren't allowed to play outside alone. But no one imagined anything sinister. At least, not yet. Diane tried to brush it off. She told herself it was coincidence or maybe there was a wild animal in the woods. But something inside her refused to settle, especially when she noticed the mud. Jeremy's boots, lined up at the door, were always dirty now. Not just a little dirt from walking home, thick caked layers of it like he'd been wandering deep in the woods. She asked where he'd been, and he gave a short, flat answer. Just walking. No follow-up, no eye contact. One morning while sweeping the porch, Diane saw boot prints in the backyard, leading away from the house and into the trees. The mud was still wet. She hadn't heard him leave, but she knew those prints were fresh. She grabbed a jacket and followed the trail, heart pounding with every step. The forest behind their house wasn't very big, but it was dense, twisting paths, thick brush, and a deep silence that swallowed sound. The footprints veered off the main path and led her through the undergrowth until she reached a small clearing. That's when she saw it. A circle made of bones, small, clean, and white, arranged with unsettling precision. They weren't buried or scattered. They were placed, as if in some sort of ritual pattern. Around the circle were burned-down candles, wax melted into the soil. Nearby lay a torn collar with a metal tag still attached. It read, Max. The golden retriever. Diane stood there for a long time, staring. Her breath came in shallow waves, and her thoughts scattered in every direction. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She took it all in, each bone, each candle, each deliberate choice, and then turned around and walked home in silence. That night she went into Jeremy's room when he was asleep. She looked again through his notebooks, more carefully this time. Between pages of mechanical diagrams she found a section labeled, The Trial. It was filled with cryptic phrases and bizarre drawings. There were notes about preparation, discipline, and elimination. At the bottom of one page, in messy block letters, was a single line. The animals are only the beginning. She closed the notebook with trembling hands. Diane didn't call the police, not yet. She told herself she needed more time, more proof. She needed to understand what he was planning. She didn't want to believe the worst about her late husband's only son. But deep down, she already knew. Jeremy wasn't just walking in the woods. He was practicing, preparing. And whatever he was preparing for, it was far from over. A week after Diane found the circle of bones in the woods, the neighborhood changed again. It started with smoke. Thick, black smoke curling into the sky from the end of the block where the Harpers lived. Their house, a pale blue two-story with a red door, was engulfed in flames. Sirens wailed through the afternoon silence as fire trucks rushed in, neighbors gathering on sidewalks watching in horror. The Harpers were out of town on vacation. There were no injuries. At first it seemed like a terrible accident. A faulty wire, a kitchen mishap. But the cause was never officially confirmed. Diane watched the flames from her front porch, her hands clenched tight around a coffee mug gone cold. She wasn't looking at the fire. She was watching Jeremy. He stood at the edge of the lawn, unmoving, eyes fixed on the chaos. There was no fear in his face, no curiosity, just quiet observation, like he was studying something. Later that evening, after the fire was out, Diane gathered his laundry and noticed soot on his hoodie. Not a little dirt. Soot. Black streaks on the sleeves like he'd leaned into something burned. His boots, once again, were muddy, and this time, scorched bits of grass stuck to the soles. She checked his backpack. Hidden in the side pocket was a metal lighter and a bottle of rubbing alcohol. Panic clawed at her chest. She sat on the bed and stared at the items in her hands. If she took them to the police, she might save someone. But what if she was wrong? What if it wasn't proof? What if they blamed her, too? That night when Jeremy left the house again, Diane didn't stop him. Instead, she went down to the basement. The space had changed. Tools were everywhere, laid out in organized rows. Wires, screws, locks, and blades. The walls were covered in diagrams. One sketch showed a garage door with a small red X on it. Another showed a house S side entrance with notes like "no camera" and "quiet hinge." There was something else. A map of the neighborhood drawn in pencil on a large piece of cardboard. Several houses were marked, each one labeled with brief, chilling notes. 2 adults, no dog. Elderly woman, oxygen tank. Kid, alone after 3 p.m. The Harper house had a thick red line through it. In the corner of the room, hidden behind a sheet, was another blade. Slightly different from the first one Diane had found, but just as long, just as deadly. This one had barbed wire coiled around the grip, crude and dangerous. It wasn't buried. It wasn't hidden. Jeremy hadn't stopped building. Diane took the machete and left the house. She drove 10 miles out to the edge of the state park, parked, and buried it deep in the woods. The hole she dug was shallow, her hands shaking the whole time. It felt like trying to cover a secret with loose dirt. But it was something. It was action. She returned home before Jeremy did. When he came in, she pretended to be asleep, but she listened. She heard him go to the basement. Then she heard nothing for a long time, not even breathing. The next morning, a new blade was already on the workbench. The news hit the neighborhood like a bomb. Maddie Price, a 12-year-old girl who lived just 3 houses down, had vanished overnight. Her bike was found lying in the driveway, one wheel still spinning when her father came out to get the paper. Her bedroom window was open, the screen removed and resting carefully against the side of the house. There were no signs of a struggle, no fingerprints, no noise. She was just gone. Search parties formed within hours. Volunteers combed the woods. Police dogs sniffed the trails. Helicopters circled the area, their blades chopping through the heavy silence that had settled over the town. Diane stood in the middle of her kitchen, clutching the countertop, trying to stop her hands from shaking. She didn't need to ask questions. She didn't need the news reports. She already knew. She waited until nightfall, then went back into the basement. Jeremy wasn't home. She didn't know where he'd gone, but she had a feeling he wouldn't be back until late. She flipped on the light and scanned the walls, the workbench, the drawers. She had checked this room before, but not like this. This time she was looking for anything that might tell her where he'd taken Maddie. Behind a shelf, she noticed something strange. A portion of the wall looked newer than the rest. Cleaner, less dusty. She tapped it. Hollow. She grabbed a hammer and pulled at the drywall. It gave way faster than she expected. Behind it was a hidden space, small and narrow, lined with old mattresses and thick insulation. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, unlit. In the corner was a pile of clothes, children's clothes. There were leggings, socks, a striped hoodie, all folded neatly. One shirt had a tiny embroidered name tag. Maddie. Diane felt her knees weaken. The air in the room was stale, heavy with something she couldn't name. There were shackles on the floor, actual metal restraints, bolted to a beam. The carpet beneath them was worn, as if someone had tested them over and over again. But Maddie wasn't there. Diane stumbled back, hands over her mouth. Her mind raced. She had no idea how long this room had existed. Had he built it slowly? Had he been planning this for months, years? The worst part was that it felt prepared, like a room waiting for a guest. She knew she couldn't keep quiet anymore. But she also knew she couldn't go directly to the police. If they found this room, if they discovered she'd known anything at all, they would arrest her for covering it up, for negligence, for endangering a child. She'd be dragged into this nightmare and never crawl back out. So, she made a different choice. That night, she drove to a gas station 2 towns over and scribbled a note on a napkin. It was short and anonymous. Check the green lawn storage off Route 12. Unit 49. There is a girl inside. She dropped it in the outdoor tip box at the local sheriff's office and left without saying a word. Less than 24 hours later, the police found Maddie. She was cold and hungry, but alive, locked inside a storage unit exactly as the note had said. No one saw who dropped the tip. Jeremy was home when they came for him. Jeremy didn't fight when the police came. He stood on the porch in his hoodie and jeans, hands in his pockets, looking more annoyed than afraid. He didn't ask what was happening or deny anything. When they put him in the back of the squad car, he glanced once at the house, then looked away. Diane watched from the living room window, frozen. Her heart pounded in her chest like a warning bell. The boy she had raised, fed, housed, tried to protect, was being arrested for kidnapping. For what could have been much worse. The investigation moved quickly. Police searched the basement, the woods, and Jeremy's belongings. They found sketches, journals, lists, and more than one weapon. The second blade Diane had buried was never found, but another was sitting on the workbench when they arrived. Shorter than the first, but just as cruel. They discovered photos of homes, pages tracking the routines of families in the neighborhood, and files labeled with dates and names. It was organized, methodical, unnerving. But they never found the hidden room. Diane had torn it apart the night Jeremy was arrested. She pulled down the mattresses, ripped out the insulation, and stuffed the clothes into a garbage bag. She hauled everything to a construction dumpster 5 blocks away in the middle of the night. Then she patched the wall with old boards from the shed and painted over it. By the time investigators checked the basement, it looked like any other teenage boy's strange workshop. Suspicious, but not damning. She told them she didn't know much, said Jeremy had always been quiet, said she hadn't seen anything until the day he was taken in. They believed her, or maybe they just didn't look too closely. A grieving stepmother with no record, no history of violence, and no clear connection to the crime didn't seem like someone to question. Jeremy was charged with kidnapping, arson, and unlawful possession of weapons. When questioned about the missing pets, he said nothing. When asked about Maddie, he refused to speak. The court ordered a psychological evaluation. The results came back as expected. Jeremy was deemed unfit to stand trial, diagnosed with multiple personality and behavioral disorders, and committed to a state psychiatric hospital for juveniles. There, he would remain indefinitely. But that didn't bring Diane any peace. Every morning she walked the woods, retracing the paths Jeremy used to take. Sometimes she'd find something small he'd left behind. Twine tied between trees, nails hammered into stumps, scraps of notebook paper stuffed into jars. Each find was like a ghost, quiet, sinister, waiting to be seen. She burned most of what she found, burying the ashes near the spot where she'd hidden the first machete. Her neighbors moved on. The Harpers rebuilt their house. The Prices put up new locks and cameras. Maddie rarely came outside anymore. Life returned to the neighborhood, slowly, carefully. But Diane never really moved on. She still lived in the same house, still cleaned the same basement, still kept a hammer and a shovel in the trunk of her car. Just in case, because the 20-inch problem had never just been about the blade. It was about what it revealed, and the part she had played in keeping it quiet.